So I'd like to welcome everyone to Laura Chrisman and Vera Teshow's presentation on the Kindergarten Educator Guide, What's in it for you. It's always great to see people from all over Southern Ontario joining us for professional development in the evening. So I'm just going to turn it over to Laura and Vera, and I know you're going to have a really great evening. It's always fun to be with them. So over to you, Vera and Laura.
Thank you so much, Mally, and welcome everyone. This evening's session is intended to support kindergarten educators with the Growing Success Addendum related to kindergarten, which was just published in 2016. We've included a link to the document. We'll include a link to the document in the chat pod. Mally, maybe you can help us out with that, although some of you may have your own hard copy as well. A little bit about us. You can see our pictures there on the screen. We're two former classroom teachers, now working as education officers in the Student Achievement Division at the Ministry of Education. Our main work is within assessment policy, with a focus on supporting kindergarten educators with implementing the assessment policy set out in Growing Success, the Kindergarten Addendum. And I'm facilitating with my colleague Laura today, who's going to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. So I worked in Waterloo Region for almost 20 years, and the last part of that 20 years I was specializing in kindergarten. Then I went off on a little adventure to the Middle East, and I was there for 9 years working in kindergarten schools in school leadership. And now I'm back in Ontario for about the last year and a half, and I'm at the ministry and very happy to be here.
And as for me, while most of my teaching was done at the junior, intermediate, and post-secondary levels, I did spend sometime 1 year covering for a kindergarten teacher once a week, teaching visual art to a kindergarten class, which I have fond memories of. I also have a particular fondness for OTF Connects, as I first discovered these webinars when I was on leave from my school board a few years ago doing some work with teachers in Argentina. And at that time, OTF Connects was my lifeline to Ontario public education and professional learning. And since then, I've attended multiple OTF Connect sessions, even upon my return to Canada. So we're both very excited to be with you online this evening as co-facilitators. So enough about us. We'd like to hear a little bit about you. So Mally was showing you that sort of polling tool where you can click off at the top there above the list of names. You can check off a green check mark or a red X. So we're not too far into the new year yet. So thinking back to the holidays, I know it seems so long ago, but it was just a few weeks ago. If you went away somewhere over the holidays, give us a green check mark. And if you stayed close to home, can you give us a red X? All right, I see a lot of homebodies, although a few folks did go away as well. Nice, thanks for sharing. And our next question, I'm not sure, Molly, if you're able to do a poll for us with 3 options. Is that possible, or do we have to ask people to check off something?
Nope, I will do that right now. Just hold on a sec.
Perfect. So Molly's going to put up a poll with option A, B, and C. So here's the question. If you're in your first 2 years of teaching kindergarten, so if you've only had kindergarten experience for about 2 years or less, would you check off option A? And if you've taught kindergarten for more than 2 years but fewer than 5, please select option B. And if you've taught kindergarten for more than 5 years, please check option C. And that poll should be up momentarily. So A is, oh, it's already up, great. So A is 2 years or less, B is more than 2 but less than 5, and C is more than 5. Okay, thank you. So the numbers are in, and it looks like we've got a lot of newer teachers and quite a few experienced teachers, and only a very few in the middle. So thank you for sharing that. It's helpful to us as we go through the evening, too, a little bit of diagnostic there. Well, whether you're new to kindergarten or just new to the Kindergarten Addendum, we are so pleased to have you here online with us this evening. We know that writing the communication of learning is still a relatively new way for many of you to communicate formally with families, and we're all on different places in this journey. So we hope that tonight's session will equip you with some helpful resources. I'm going to turn it over to Laura now to share a learning goal and some success criteria for the evening.
Thank you, Vera. As you can see from this slide, our goal this evening reflects our desire to refine the way we communicate by using the available resources that have been created to support us in this process. In order to ensure that we achieve this evening's goal, Vera and I have co-developed some success criteria that will serve as indicators of success. We'll revisit these at the end of tonight's session, but for now, I'll just give you a moment to read them and to add any that you feel may be missing by using the chat pod. You can also share any questions or comments you may have at any time in the chat pod on the lower left of the screen. In order to have an opportunity to practice each of the success criteria, here's an overview of the session we have planned for you tonight. We know that teachers learn best from each other, so we will try to give you many opportunities to share your experience and wisdom throughout tonight's webinar.
Thanks, Laura. You can see that we've already done the first two, and we're going to be moving on to our view of the child. So for this next activity, we're going to ask you to find and use that stamp tool on the left of your screen. We'd like to ground our thinking this evening in the view of the child. We've provided you with some cartoon images with which we hope you're familiar. And we know that cartoons can sometimes be a little bit of a stereotype, but that's kind of the point of this activity. We're trying to get you to think about those very explicit or specific characteristics when you're thinking about young learners. So think about a quality or characteristic associated with or illustrated by these images. Then we'll get you to choose an image which resonates with you when you think about the view of children as found in the kindergarten program, and drag a green check mark or stamp over that image. And feel free to explain your thinking for your choice in the chat pod. So we'll give you a few moments for that. Wonderful, and we're seeing lots of checks appearing on the screen and some explanations to go with. And if you haven't had a chance to read some people's comments, please do feel free to scroll up and down in the chat pod and read what other people have written there. Okay, thanks for sharing there. And somebody just commented, I feel like they have a little of all these characters, and somebody else is agreeing with that comment there. And absolutely, we saw things like curious, actively exploring their working theory for Calvin and Hobbes. I think I saw somebody talk about Curious George and that whole curiosity piece, and we see certainly lots of check marks there. Little Einsteins, curious, rich in potential. Dora the Explorer, somebody noted that, and we know that Dora is also so capable and curious. And the enthusiasm that Tigger comes with certainly exemplifies many of the children we see in kindergarten. So thanks for sharing your thinking there. You've captured the view actually that's found in the kindergarten program. Laura?
Thanks, Vera. For those of you who have been teaching kindergarten for some time, you will know that there have been some significant changes to both the program and to the assessment policy for kindergarten. Both are anchored in this view of the child. What evidence of this do you see in either document, and more specifically, What are some shifts in practice that support the view of the child as capable, competent, curious, and rich in potential and experience? Please share your thinking in the chat pod.
Oh, I think we've got somebody with their mic on.
Sorry, there's no more room to record messages. Hello? हाँ नमस्ते.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay. Right, lots of great ideas in the chat pod. Just to reiterate, we saw things coming up about being flexible and open-minded, play-based, inquiry-based, lots of exploration, authentic, I love that word, very important idea. Experience, all of those are absolutely important shifts that we have made with this new program. So thank you for sharing your rich thinking. And we are happy to see that many of the pedagogical shifts you suggested are in the kindergarten program document. A few other things that we were brainstorming when we were thinking about the shifts, we talked as well about responsive relationship. The critical element of learning in relationship. Environment as third teacher is another important shift for many of us. Pedagogical documentation. And we'll be talking a bit more about that because that's our primary assessment strategy in kindergarten. And yes, we talked about the whole learner being learner-centered. You that your first and best resources are often the primary documents themselves. So in this case, of course, that's the kindergarten program document and the kindergarten addendum, which is the assessment policy for all publicly funded kindergarten classrooms in Ontario. You see a picture of both of those documents on your screen. Now, how many of you knew that the kindergarten program in the electronic format found on the ministry website was designed as a professional learning tool? It has live links to lots of supplemental resources, including videos. Of course, for Vera and our favorite section of the kindergarten program is possibly pages 36 to 45, because that's where we focus on assessment and learning in kindergarten, making children's thinking and learning visible. It's well worth rereading. You may know as well that the addendum was specifically designed to support the program. So we do encourage you to go to these documents first and often. A deep understanding of these documents will support you best in your work with students.
And Molly, if you have a chance, could you please add the link to those two documents in the chat pod? So Molly, if we could get links to the kindergarten addendum and also the kindergarten program in the chat pod, that would be great. Now, as promised, As promised, we will spend much of this session digging deeply into the second draft of the Guide for Educators to Communicating with Parents About Children's Learning. We actually revised the first draft of this guide, incorporating feedback from a variety of sources, mostly folks just like you who gave their feedback on EduGains, or perhaps you attended a kindergarten session specifically, and we took that feedback and redrafted the guide. And it's now posted on EduGains again. It was posted at the beginning of October. And this draft of the guide is still posted on EduGains in the kindergarten subdomain, along with a survey again, which we encourage all of you to complete if you haven't already done so. Our intention is to continue gathering feedback from as many sources as possible until after the January reporting period, and we'll then revise the feedback and make another revision to the guide in response. And Molly, if you could post a link to the guide as well, that would be helpful. I know some of you have already printed it off or bookmarked it, but just in case. Thanks. Our hope is that draft 3 will be available to you in time for writing the third communication of learning report in June. So just for our own understanding as we move forward, if you could take a moment and in the little green drop-down menu next to your name, indicate with a green check mark if you have read draft 1 of the guide. You could give us, do we have happy faces here? How does it work? Oh yes, so we have a smiley face and applause. Why don't we do that? So if you've read draft 1, please give us a happy face. And if you've had a chance to peruse draft 2 already, maybe why don't you do applause for us? And if you haven't had a chance to look at either version, no problem, just leave it blank. So we're in that very left one where you can put a smiley face or applause. Excellent, thanks. So we've seen a few folks have looked at draft 1. Some of you have already seen draft 2, which is great, and some folks haven't seen either draft, which is okay too. So this gives us some information. And oh, we have one person who has seen it but needs a little bit of a review, so no problem at all. That's why you're here tonight. So thanks so much for giving us a sense of your interaction with these documents. And I'll turn it back over to Laura now.
Okay, we are going to begin by having a look at the section in the guide that addresses equitable and inclusive communication. First, let's make sure we have a shared understanding of diversity. Please take a moment to read the explanation from our Equity and Inclusive Education Policy. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to use the chat pod to share. You may have heard of the Ontario Education Equity Action Plan that was just released in October 2017. It can be found on the Ministry website. The plan has 4 areas of focus, one of which is school and classroom practices. There are 2 action items in that section that we thought were particularly applicable to the kindergarten context. The first one we identified involves implementing teaching practices, curriculum, and assessment that are culturally reflective of and responsive to the students taught, so that all students see themselves and their own and their classmates' lived experience reflected in what and how they are learning. You may wish to reflect on how the kindergarten program and the practice of pedagogical documentation support this action item. Think also of how you ensure that the students you teach see themselves reflected in the learning happening in your classroom. The other action item that seemed especially appropriate for kindergarten educators is identifying strategies for reaching out to parents who are disengaged from the education system for a variety of reasons. Consider the many ways that you work to build reciprocal relationships with parents and what you might do to authentically engage those parents who appear harder to reach. As we go into a short health break, feel free to share your ideas and success stories around these two actions in the chat pod.
Actually, I think we have enough time to take some time to do that now before we go on a health break. I'm just looking at the time. So the questions are there on the slide, and Laura just read those two sections of the action plan to you, and we've posted the link in the chat pod too if you want to scroll up and review it. And maybe we'll just take about 7 minutes or so, 5 to 7 minutes, to think about those two questions and respond. So basically, how does the kindergarten program and the practice of pedagogical documentation support those action items? And secondly, what might you do to authentically engage those parents who appear harder to reach? So just share your thoughts in the chat pod. If somebody wants the mic, you can raise your hand even, and we can give you the mic and you can just talk if that's easier.
Do you want me to put the timer on for 6 minutes?
Yeah, that would be great, Melly. Thanks.
Hi, Lisa. We're just reflecting on those two questions. So there's no sound right now. I wish there was a way we could do music. I could be creative and just have something playing, but we're just reflecting on those two questions that Vera and Laura have put in the chat box, and we'll be back in about 3.5 minutes. There's still some people I need to bug for last names, and I'm really, really sorry. It's just a glitch. They've had a little bit of a change, so if I could just ask, I need Marla and Stornelli, Margaret, Lisa, Sandy, Andrea, and Vanessa, and Sally for your last names, please.
Okay, we, I think, are going to move into the health break. We're seeing lots of comments in the chat pod, and thanks for sharing that commentary. And over the break, we'll obviously leave the chat pod open. And so, for example, somebody was mentioning fresh grade, and somebody else had a question about that, so feel free to respond to each other's questions as well. You are really the holders of the expertise, more so than we are, so do feel free to just respond in the chat pod, anything anybody else has written there. We also invite you to take a few minutes now to stand up, do a little stretch, roll your shoulders, refill your water bottle, whatever you need to do to take a break from sitting for so long. Although Laura, with her many years of kindergarten experience, assures me that kindergarten teachers never sit down during the day. And we'll come back together in about 3 to 5 minutes. And again, feel free to add your comments about the previous slide or anything else you're seeing in the chat pod right in there. So, Molly, I don't know. I think you said you were going to set a timer. Can you? Oh, it's almost running out. Can you set it for another 3 minutes just so people can have a little washroom break before we move on? Yes, what surprise readers. It sounds really interesting. Mm-hmm. Whoever wrote that, tell us more. Okay, welcome back. If you could just take a moment to find the section now in your kindergarten program that specifically addresses equity and inclusive education. Hint, hint, it starts on page 101. And we'll give you a minute or two to have a read through and share a phrase in the chat pod that resonates with you. So kindergarten program, page 101. We'll give you a few minutes to read that. And if there's a phrase that resonates with you, you can just copy and paste it right into the chat pod. KR, there is sound now. I hope you can hear us. But it's about to go quiet. Right, but it's about to go quiet because we're giving you reading time. Jesse, the guide is online if you don't have your own hard copy. The link was in the chat pod a while back. Mally, are you able to find the link to the... Oh, she already did. Oh, here. Good. Thank you. Thanks, Melanie, for sharing your phrase. Is there anybody else who got a phrase there from the kindergarten program that they would like to share? And Jesse, when you said guide, did you mean the kindergarten program? Because I think Molly put the link into the Educator guide, which you'll need in just a moment. But right now you need the program.
There, Laura, I forgot to ask, how many minutes do you want for this section?
I'm not sure. We're just reading everybody's comments and being amazed. Maybe another minute and a half.
Okay, I'll just put it up. It'll give us the just a reminder.
That sounds great. Thank you. Okay, thank you so much for sharing those. I'm just really, Laura and I are reading over them here in our little room on the 4th floor of our 1970s built government building, gray government building, far away from you all. And we're just really amazed at the comments. Like they're just, it's so empowering. When I read this, I feel like, wow, yeah, and as kindergarten educators, you have the ability to impact so much change. And a lot of people put the quote about not just in the kindergarten classroom, but beyond that too, right, into the broader society. So,
yeah, and I just want to go off the script for a minute too. And I just kept saying that diversity is valued, and with all the kinds of things that are going on out there in the world, it just warms my heart so much to be reminded again and again that in this place, in this country, we value diversity. It is, in fact, our strength. So thank you, all of you, for pulling out some of those quotes that really resonate with you, and they're just so important.
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, it's really nice that whatever kids are hearing on the news or picking up around them, when they walk into the classrooms in Ontario, they're hearing the good stuff and experiencing that sense of safety. Moving on now to the Educator Guide, and that was the other link that Mally had put in there earlier, and Mally, maybe you can throw that up again. Since the Educator Guide is intended to support both Growing Success at Kindergarten Addendum and the program document, we wanted to take a moment just to find the section of the draft Educator Guide that deals with equitable and inclusive communication on page 13. So we'll give you a moment just to have a read through that section. Don't type anything in the chat pod yet, unless you need help finding it, but just have a read through on page 13. No question. We're just having a look at the guide on page 13, the section on equity and inclusion. Equity and inclusive communication. So as we consider issues of equity and inclusion, we invite you to share your thinking around these two reflective questions on the Google Doc that we're just going to link. So if you click on that Google Doc, you don't need to have Gmail, you just click on and you'll see there's a little table there, and it's got the two questions that are in this slide. And the first one is, in composing comments, how do we take into account the unique and diverse social, cultural, and linguistic perspectives and experiences of kindergarten children and their families? And the second one is, how might you check your assumptions for bias in order to be responsive to diverse needs?
So again, we invite you to go into that Google Doc and give us some ideas around these two questions.
Molly, if you want to set the timer maybe for about, shall we say, 6 minutes or so? Okay, just about another minute or so, and if you've added your comment, please feel free to read through some of the comments that other people are making. And you can, you'll see we've already done that, and you can do it too. If there's something that sort of speaks to you, just highlight it, and a little box will pop up next to that with a plus, and you can add your comment out or your question out in the margin there.
Thank you very much for sharing your thinking. Do feel free to take those reflective questions back to your colleagues, and perhaps you can generate a discussion with your colleagues and see the kinds of ideas that they come up with. Reading through these comments, again, I'm absolutely reminded why kindergarten teachers rock, kindergarten educators, pardon me, why kindergarten educators absolutely rock, and why I am so proud to be a kindergarten educator. Okay, we're going to move on and talk about something that we have heard a lot about in the last year or so. A lot of our feedback indicates that educators have some significant questions around when and how to best communicate concerns that they may have with some students' learning. So as you can see from draft 2 of the guide, we've added a section to address this. Let's unpack this new section that we've added to the Educator Guide a little bit. It can be found in section 3 on page 14. We'd like to give you a few minutes to review this section. As you read, we're wondering what you notice. Are there any surprises? And what are you wondering about? We're going to give you about 4 minutes to dig into this section of the Educator Guide. And again, we're now thinking about how do we communicate those enduring evidence-based concerns. We're now looking at draft 2 of the Educator Guide, and we are looking at page 14. That should be the beginning of section 3. The title should say, Communicating Enduring Evidence-Based Concerns. Thank you for spending some time in the guide. Now that you've read this section, let's take a few minutes to clarify how concerns are contextualized in kindergarten. First of all, what is meant by enduring concerns? And secondly, why does the guide specify that concerns should be evidence-based? Please share your ideas about one or both of these questions in the chat pod. Okay, so enduring, of course, means something that is lasting. It's not just a temporary thing. And evidence-based, as was pointed out, means concrete, that, let me just go and have a look at that again, because it was, yes, it's measurable and can be understood by many people. So we really do need to think about those two terms when we're wondering about communicating. When we think about the communication of learning, which is a formal way of communicating with families, and of course only one of many communication tools and strategies educators use throughout the year, what we include there is what the child knows and demonstrates in relation to the overall expectations of the kindergarten program. It's focused on a child's learning. Sometimes educators may have concerns about a particular child's progress. Within our relationships with families and maintaining our asset-based view of children, we want to think of the most appropriate way, time, and place to communicate areas of concern when these arise. Educators keep in mind the established board and school cultures and processes to identify, monitor, and, if necessary, document those significant concerns while maintaining a focus on the child's learning. You have likely noticed in your reading just now and previously, if you've already had a chance to review the guide, the focus on how concerns are communicated, and in particular, the shift from how we may have typically communicated these things in the past to the way that we'd like to communicate them now. So we have identified some other shifts in practice. Take a look at this slide. You'll see some of the shifts as educators consider the impact of positively reflecting each child's unique identity. Both of the appendices in the Educator Guide look at some shifts that have been made. Appendix B in particular, which starts on page 28 of the guide, further discusses how we might communicate enduring evidence-based concerns, and it offers some partial sample comments to illustrate what these shifts may look like when writing the communication of learning. Please take a minute to review these shifts and see if you can suggest any other shifts in practice. We'd like to give you just a few minutes to review Appendix B and share any comments you may have in the chat pod. And certainly if you have any questions, if you have any wonderings about this, please feel free to share and we'll do our best to respond. We hope you've had enough time to take a quick look at Appendix B, and remember you can always go back and reread it. Again, think about having a discussion with some of your colleagues around some of these shifts in practice, because like anything, we're all on a journey, and sometimes it takes a while to incorporate this new thinking into our daily practice. Now,
before you move on, I just noticed somebody made a comment, Laura, and it's such a positive one. Thank you so much, M. Liverpool, for sharing your authentic thinking there. It is a difficult shift in thinking, and we so appreciate you continuing to try and modeling growth mindset. You might recall at the beginning of our session we asked how many people had been teaching for fewer than 2 years, more than 2 years, that sort of thing. And actually, Laura and I were commenting the other day that in some ways it's almost harder if you've been teaching longer, because you have to unlearn some of the ways we used to go about doing things and start thinking in a new way. So it's, in some sense, it can be sometimes easier for those just entering into the profession. So thanks for sharing that thought. We appreciate your honesty there. And so does Sarah.
Absolutely. But I think a lot of the people in this room will say, if you persevere, the rewards are tremendous. I mean, instant validation of your efforts from kindergarten kids. It's all in the hugs and the smiles and the love that you get showered with every day. Right, so what we have right now is a quote from Learning for All, and this we just put up as an additional reminder of the perspective through which we view children as we capture and communicate their thinking and learning. We do have a link to Learning for All that you may like to peruse another time when you have a few spare minutes.
Thank you, Laura, for sharing that connection with us. And Molly, while I'm chatting, maybe you can queue up that e-module. And if not, I have a link handy. Just let me know. So for those of us who are more visual learners, a short video can sometimes be preferable to reading. So we've given you lots of reading tonight. And EduGains, the EduGains website, as you may know, features a wide range of video series, including this animated e-module series unpacking key features of the kindergarten addendum. And each video snippet is fewer than 3 minutes in length. So we're going to have a look at Module 3, Communicating with Parents. It's just over 2 minutes long, and as you watch, consider how this video reinforces what we've already talked about this evening and what new insights you gleaned from the video. So we'll send you off to watch that, and when you come back, maybe just give us a green check so that we know you're back in the room. Okay, so just about 2.5 minutes.
Yeah, and as Laura and Vera said, just click on the link and it will take you directly to the video. We can't show that in the Blackboard room tonight.
Okay, and we're seeing lots of folks returning to the main room, so we'll just give you another 10 seconds or so to finish up. Wonderful. Okay, so our next sort of final part of the evening is to send you off on a scavenger hunt, and we hope you'll come back. We're only going to give you about 10 minutes. And the scavenger hunt involves going to the EduGains homepage, which I'm just going to put into the chat pod here. And once you get there, at the top there's of the homepage, it says Ministry Licensed Resources, and then there's a drop-down menu, so you want to click on the kindergarten one. And EduGains, if you haven't been there before, it's actually a collection really of subdomains that belong to different sections of the ministry. We have one for assessments, but there's also one for kindergarten. That's the one we want you to look at tonight. So we're going to give you about 10 minutes to explore the kindergarten subdomain of the EduGains website. And as I said, send you on a little scavenger hunt to locate and bookmark in your browser, if you want to come back to them later, at least 3 of the following items. Excuse me. And those items are listed on the slide here in the main room. So we'd like you to find 3 of the following. So more e-modules about the key features of kindergarten assessment. And those are those videos. We just saw one of them, and see if you can find the rest. There are learning modules for educators. There's a parent guide, principal tip sheets, and FAQs about kindergarten. So when you found at least 3 of those items and have taken the time to preview at least one of them, then come on back to the room. And if you're done a little bit early, if you're done before the 10 minutes are up, please feel free to share some of your findings in the chat pod or comment to each other. Is it the developed resources not licensed? Let me go and see. Yes, Ministry Developed Resources. Sorry, I gave you that information. Ministry Developed Resources in kindergarten is in the 3rd column, about 2 down. You can also just wait for that carousel to come around, but I always personally find that very confusing. So there you go. 10 minutes, and we'll see you back in the main room, and we will be in the chat while you're doing that if people have any questions. Okay, and about 5 minutes left. 5 minutes. "30 seconds left if you're not back in the main room. Wrap up your scavenger hunt and come on back." Okay, thank you so much. Hopefully you were able to find some of those resources. And you'll notice I've just added a link in the chat pod. And our unit here at the Ministry is in the midst of updating our assessment subdomain on EduGains. And as part of that, we're trying to incorporate some self-guided tours so that folks who are maybe not able to get out to PD or whatnot can have kind of a systematic approach to traveling through some of the resources on there virtually. So if you haven't had a chance to check that out yet, it's on the home page of the new EduGains assessment website. And at the very right, you'll see interested in learning more about kindergarten. And if you click on that, there's a self-guided tour or a course or whatever you want to call it. And of course, you could work on that with your colleagues. But if you wanted to do it alone, you could do that as well.
And I have to say, we tried a new platform to do that called Adobe Spark, and we're really, really excited with the results. It's very cool, so do check it out.
Okay, thank you. So we hope that you have found not only a treasure trove of helpful resources on EduGains, but that you had some fun too. Now let's review our learning goal for this session, and then we'll revisit our success criteria to see how we did in meeting our goal. So we said at the beginning of this evening that we're learning to use the Kindergarten Educator Guide and other relevant resources to support our work in communicating learning with all families.
Thanks, Vera. So, reflecting on the success criteria that we identified earlier, please use the stamping tool and put a happy face next to the areas about which you are feeling more confident as a result of the session. You can also add a question mark next to anything you feel you would like to learn more about. This will give us some ideas about planning future sessions, and it will also be a way for you to track your own learning as professionals who are always seeking to improve their practice.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us tonight. We appreciate your participation and your dedication to the province's youngest learners. We know OTF will be providing a feedback survey, and Laura and I value your honest feedback so that we know how we can best support you in the important work that you do. And in addition to that feedback survey, please don't hesitate to reach out and contact us. Our emails are there. I'm also on Twitter, and we welcome your communication. Thanks for joining us.
And one final plug, if you haven't yet filled in that survey on EduGains in response to the Educator Guide, please think about doing that in the next 3 weeks, Vera, because we'll be closing down that survey just at the beginning of February, and we really do want to hear from as many people as possible to ensure that draft 3 is as responsive as it can be to your needs. So thank you again. I'd like to echo Vera's appreciation, and we do have a couple more minutes just at the end there before Mally jumps in. If you have any hot questions, please feel free to put them in the chat pod, and we will try to get to them and respond. Thanks so much, everyone.
So just thank you very much, everyone, for joining us tonight. I want to reiterate what Vera and Laura mentioned about the feedback survey. So there's just a couple of ways to get to it. One of them is you can click directly on the link that's on the screen, and I've also put the link in the chat room. What will happen is when you fill in the survey, it will direct you to download a certificate of completion for your professional portfolio, which is always something great to have. So we have the new session is going is just beginning, as we mentioned. So we will we'll look forward to seeing you in other sessions. If you go to the OTF Connects website and look at the calendar, there's a lot of sessions listed until the March break. These are the ones that are just upcoming right now. And there's still funding available for the AQ subsidies for math, technology, and kindergarten. And that's it. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us tonight. I see that there's one question in the chat for you, and I'm just going to put the feedback link again. And hope to see you again. Thank you very much.